Hello and welcome to this webinar brought to you by the SLP Gene Foundation. The mission of the SLP Gene Foundation is to improve the lives of individuals with SLP-associated syndrome, as well as their families through support, research, and education. And that's why we are here today, to learn more about our children's condition and how we can help them reach their best potential. I am Mariana Shui. I'm the mother of Gabriel, a 14 years old boy with SLP2, and we live in Brazil. I've taken a deep interest in studying speech and language issues, including apraxia speech and motor speech disorders, which is why it's such a pleasure for me to introduce our presenter today. This webinar will cover important components to consider when creating individualized treatment plans for motor speech intervention with a focus on child-centered motor-based therapy. This webinar will be recorded, so we suggest everyone stay muted. Our presenter, Dr. Jennifer Moore, is an SLP and co-owner of a multidisciplinary private practice in northern New Jersey. Dr. Moore has held roles in academia and healthcare before founding her Integrative Therapeutic Center. She is a prompt certified instructor and an expert in motor speech development and disorders. Her research focused on children with coexisting motor speech dysfunction and autism. Dr. Moore is a sought-after speaker, having presented at state, national, and international conferences. Her mission is to bridge the gap between research and clinical practice by creating resources that connect evidence-based knowledge with hand-on therapy. I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Moore and to share her expertise and passion for motor speech intervention with all of you. Welcome, Dr. Moore. Please feel free to begin your lecture titled Using a Whole Child Approach to Motor Speech Intervention.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. That was such an amazing introduction. Thank you so much. I am so honored to be a part of this presentation. I love connecting with parents and sharing my experience as a motor speech-based clinician, as well as a private practitioner, and as well as participating in research projects. So I am just ecstatic to share with all of you knowledge, clinical examples, and give you some tools to help support the effectiveness of therapy for your children. So I'm just so excited to be here. So a little bit about me, in addition to the introduction, my why is why I support a multidisciplinary center is that because when we view children as a whole, it helps it just makes a way bigger impact in their lives and the lives of their families. And I'm a big component of working on that self-advocacy and really making a change outside of the therapy session. And as a clinician, we might see our kids for 30 minutes, 60 minutes per week, but it's really that maximizing the effectiveness of our treatment by looking at the whole picture, putting in support strategies, acknowledging strengths and weaknesses in different domains so that we can set achievable goals and also help facilitate that generalization from our therapy sessions into real life, because that's what matters. What matters is what happens outside of our therapy session, where we want to see kids be the best versions of themselves. So that is my why, and why I am an advocate for viewing the whole child and not just zooming in on speech and articulation or a diagnosis like apraxia. So at our center, a little bit about my center, as I mentioned, I am in northern New Jersey. We're about 30 minutes from New York City. And I co-own a private practice with another SLP, and we use this multidisciplinary approach to treatment. And our focus is on function and support strategies. And I'm going to share a lot about what we do at our clinic, and what research says is effective for maximizing treatment, impact of treatment. So my theme for today is looking beyond just speech. So we're going to go through different variables that can impact therapy, different we like to say active ingredients that make motor speech intervention effective, and ways that we can, again, get those lasting effects outside of our treatment sessions into the real world where it matters the most and making an impact on child's life outside of the four walls of a clinic. So I just want to say I love answering questions. If it is a question that can quickly be answered pertaining to content, definitely raise your hand or pop it in the chat. But if it's a child-specific question that would require a longer answer from me, we're going to hold those until the end of the webinar. We also have a Q&A at the end with some questions, so I'll be answering those as well. So I have been a prompt instructor for, I want to say 12 years now, and I've been a speech therapist for 15 years. So my whole journey has been on this route of looking at how we have that interaction between speech, language, communication, and as humans, that interaction, that communication is what we need to survive. We have to communicate our thoughts, our wants, our needs. And when there is a motor speech deficit, as we know, those can be impacted. So since I've been on this, like the majority of my clinical practice has been utilizing the prompt approach. And what I love about, even though I use other approaches as well, but what I love about the prompt approach is it aligns with looking at the child as a whole. And they developed a conceptual framework, which I'm going to give you a brief overview on. And this is the framework in which we use for assessing a child as well as developing a treatment plan, because we're not just working in one domain, because we know there's that interaction, like I said, between speech and language and then social use of those words. And social use can look differently for many kids. Autistic children are going to communicate differently than a child who is not autistic. So seeing the child for where they are and their preferences is something we're going to talk about a little bit more. But our conceptual framework is what I want to kick off this talk with. And these are the three main domains. So physical sensory is what we're looking at in the body, like in regards to high tone, low tone, motor movements, and sensation. So if I'm touching my face, can we perceive that? Or do I need a lot of touch to process that? Or maybe I'm hyposensitive where input is going to dysregulate my system. So looking at physically, what are we seeing in the body? Cognitive linguistic is what's happening on the inside. What is the language looking like? How are they making sense of the world around them? And so this is super important for therapy because we can teach a child how to say the word up. I can prompt in up. I can teach them how to move their jaw, how to turn on their voice. But if we're not connecting motor to meaning, then how are we going to effectively communicate? Then we're just stuck in this repetitive or repeating, right? Say up, we say up, okay, but it's not really conceptualized into what is up. And then social emotionally, like how are you going to use that word up to engage and communicate? Request, up can be a request. Up can be a response to an answer, a question like, where do you want to go? Up. Or where is something? Oh, it's up. So looking at a child as a whole and looking at their needs, we have to see where the strengths and weaknesses are in each of these domains and balance them out in our sessions. And That's what, when we're utilizing the prompt approach, that's what's happening. I'm identifying, okay, this child has difficulty moving their jaw, or they don't know how to move their jaw yet for speech. So I'm going to support that. We're going to pick words that they also need help with, connecting that muscle to motor, motor to meaning. So up, what does up mean? And then, like I said, how are we going to use it? So we're working in all three domains to create and to help support, to create a treatment plan and to help support where it's needed. Another variable that I love to mention is there's been a huge shift from away from the medical model where it's deficit based, like a child can't do this or they present with this deficit. And when we're using a strength-based approach, so we're moving away from that and using a strength-based neurodiversity affirming approach, we're looking at not labels, but describing what we're seeing in each area. So instead of saying, whereas before we might say this child, like, a medical model or deficit model might describe a child in terms of low functioning, high functioning, nonverbal, this, that, there's all labels. When we shift, and this aligns with looking at the child as a whole, you'll see on the right of the screen, there's that pie, right? So we're looking at their support needs in various areas. So a child might have low language support needs, but high sensory support needs. So looking at describing the areas of support and how much support is needed is going to give more of a strength-based. We're shifting away from using terms like non-speaking to, nonverbal, shifting away from nonverbal to non-speaking. So that sets the child up right out of the gate for success because we are using that child-centered view. And I adopted this at our clinic because I'm going to go through the layers of what we look at, but this helps us streamline our treatment because we can, if we're looking in domains, we're looking at how can we help, if we help support the sensory domain, that's going to help the language domain come out. Or if and I'm going to talk about sensory regulation, but if I get my client regulated, they're going to be more ready to receive that tactile input that I'm giving them. So everything works together and we have to identify each domain because it's going to be helpful in creating this comprehensive treatment plan. If we're just looking in one area, that's where our kids get stuck. That's where treatment gets stuck. That's where everything kind of isn't doing the best that it can do, in terms of everything coming together for a nice treatment plan. The last framework that I like to use is the ICF framework. And this is from a research study by Skoog and Mass from 2020. So this looks at a condition. So this example was for apraxia of speech. And what I like for this is it's outlining. So you can use it to outline the impact of that diagnosis on different areas and to kind of map out how not being able to formulate words can impact your participation in certain activities, as well as identify what supports are needed to help in therapy, and what other areas it can impact. So as we see with apraxia of speech, the activity is just something that we engage in. So this is verbal communication is one of the impairments that this can cause. So what is going on in the body? Movement of articulators to produce consistent, accurate speech. That's what's going on in the body, and that's impacting our verbal communication. And then what is that impacting the participation level? Our kids with apraxia, it's difficult. That's what they're working on, right? Effectively communicating with others, being understood by others, and using and developing speech across environments. Can I go to a birthday party? Can I communicate in school? Can I say these words, those words? And looking at environmental factors, as well as personal factors. So that can impact, as we know, self-esteem, social development, success in school, and what supports. So this framework combined with the other frameworks, just to give you guys an idea of like different domains and that level of impact. And ICF is a great thing to map in, to kind of map out, I mean, what you're doing in therapy. If we're just working on saying the word apple, does that make an impact outside versus practicing hi and saying hi? Hi is going to have 1,000 times more of an impact than apple. So for me, if I can pick hi and I can teach my client how to say hi, how to motor plan the airflow, the jaw movement, then guess what? They're going to increase their social interaction with peers because I empowered them to say hi. They're going to have that self-esteem. They're going to want to participate in, with peers at the playground. They're going to go up to somebody and say hi. So this kind of aligns with that level of impact. And that's all, I'm very passionate about this. And so all this framework kind of helps us as clinicians identify, like I said, strengths and weaknesses. But also the big thing is customizing your therapy so that we can make a greater impact outside of the clinic. So for customizing motor speech therapy, it starts with not looking at words. We're not just going to say, hey, you're non-speaking, we're going to teach you how to say ball. Ball, say ball, ball. That's not really getting that like bottom up approach where we're getting to the core of why the child is having difficulty saying ball. And I want to mention what we adopted at our clinic, as well as this is the framework that I recently published on with Jamie Boyle and Aravind Namashivayam. We created a motor speech, a framework, motor speech intervention for neurodiversity affirming practice. And so this is a free access research article, and I can give you guys the link to it to download. And this is the framework in which works from the inside out. And what motivated us to create this is that we're not starting, if you see level 3 as like words, you can't just go in and work on words or sounds without acknowledging the child's needs and building up the child so that we're at that level. So at the core of this framework is sensory regulation, which we're going to talk a little bit about in the next slides, but sensory regulation, like, do you feel regulated in your body, or are you hyper reactive? Are you dysregulated? How much sensory information do you need to reach that state of equilibrium where you feel good? We have kids that come into the clinic and they are running, jumping, like bouncing off the walls. They're like seeking input. They need a lot of input so that they can feel that equilibrium. And then you have the other side of the sensory spectrum, where kids can be hypersensitive, where the littlest input is going to set them in that dysregulation. So we have kids that crave input and kids that can't process it, it's too much. So if we're thinking of motor speech intervention, a big part of it is that tactile cues. So I always say this, if you're not feeling good in your body and you're not regulated, me going in with a tactile cue isn't going to be effective, and it's going to cause meltdown, because if your body's not at that equilibrium, you're not going to be ready to receive that information, process it, store it, and then utilize it. So at the core, before we even go in with tactile cueing, I got to make sure that the client is regulated, whether that's going on the swing first, jumping on the trampoline. I have to get them regulated. And from that, we build trust, body autonomy. We look at using tactile, using input with consent from the client and assent. So having them accept that. We're never doing, let me prompt you, let me go here. We're saying, can I help you with that? Is it okay if I touch your cheeks? and teaching body autonomy early on. That builds that trust. Language and communication is the middle layer. And we're going to get into this, but we always need a form of communication. So if spoken words are not at the level where the child is at, AAC from the start. And it is always a good thing to have, because that is giving the child an ability to communicate. And motor speech intervention years ago did not include AAC, right? It was a heavy focus on speech. And research has shown that when a child has a choice, I can communicate with my mouth or I can communicate with my AAC, they have that power and that autonomy. They're more likely to take risks and try and participate. So once we have everything established, then we go to the outer level, which is then introducing spoken words and introducing phonatory control and moving the jaw and trying to help them develop those motor speech skills. So kind of inside building those layers. So the core of, like I said, is going to be that sensory support. This is a picture all the way to the right of one of my clients in a body sock, which is an OT tool. It's Lycra. It's very gives you that input. It's like you're wearing a tight shirt. I like to include this picture, and that's him and the one next to it. So the third and fourth picture. Before he would come in for motor speech therapy, and before I would get into the therapy, he needed 5-10 minutes to regulate himself. And this is what he needed. He went on the crash pad, went in the sock, and he told me he needed squeezes. And that's what we did. And then when he felt good, he came out and we progressed with our therapy. So just a big part of therapy is, as clinicians, we cannot ignore sensory needs. We have to use sensory needs and support and address those sensory needs. Otherwise, we're not going to be successful in our therapy. So sensory supports can be giving input, setting up the environment. I don't do therapy with the light on. I use the natural light. It's more calming. Fluorescent can be dysregulating. So it's little changes like that. Or it could be even hand sanitizer that I use. Sometimes I have my clients pick out what smell they want, like lavender versus pumpkin spice, because lavender is calming to them and they like that. And when I put it on my hands and I am on their face, it's more calming and they're chill. Others like the alerting, so they'll pick pumpkin spice or apple because they like having extra information. So always think about how can we modify the environment. This is an example of, I have kids that love to watch things spinning. So I make sure that their environment is full of things that spin, because that's going to get that motivation for them to want to attempt to say whatever the target word is. So there's a variety. You can do anything that's visual, whether it's spinners or this is a coin. One client who's super motivated by me, spinning a quarter on the desk, and we got so much language, so many attempts out of that. So we have to think outside the box. With our sensory supports, we also think about just postural support. Motor speech therapy doesn't need to be at the table. I don't know many kids anywhere that enjoy sitting at the table for so long. I know they'd rather be on a peanut ball, which isn't right, or sitting on a beanbag. And I'm a mom of 4, and we're going to get into homework, but it's hard. And after a long day of school, my clients come in, they want nothing to do with the table and the desk, and I don't expect them to. So thinking outside the box is super helpful. So if we're thinking inside out, we think about sensory, we think about how we're setting everybody's body up for the therapy. And this is where we look at motor speech. So thinking about where the client is. This is a motor speech hierarchy that the prompt approach uses. And just a brief overview, we look at specific motor skills like voicing, voiceless airflow, jaw movement. When I say up versus me, my jaw went open for up, but it's stabilized for me. So breaking down the different motor movements that are needed for different words and what we need for sentences and connected speech. So these are all the different levels. We're looking at labial facial control for rounding, retraction, tongue movements, everything in a hierarchy. Meaning that if we don't have good jaw control, how are you going to get good tongue control? If we don't have good jaw control and we can't say hop, how are we going to say happy Halloween? More complex. So this is research-based. It builds on different motor skills to support other motor skills. So when we're looking at what a client can do, we're just not saying, oh, he can say the P sound. Great. No, because we have to look at P and different variables. When we say pop, we have to put our lips together, release the air, open your jaw, turn your voice on, close your jaw, put your lips together, turn your voice off, and release the air. So a lot goes into saying the word pop. So we're looking at, from a motor speech perspective, how are they moving their jaw? If they can't move their jaw back up, you're going to get pa. And all these motor planning that goes into it, as well as the specifications. How hard are you putting your lips together? Are you turning your voice on when you should? Are you using the right lip muscles? All of this goes in, but it's a very fine-tuned skill. And so in motor speech intervention, we're looking at that. We're looking at the quality of movement if you're taking this more of a visual approach. And looking at the quality of movement. So how much movement are they doing? Are they doing pop? Are they doing pop? Or are they doing pop? So how much movement? Because that's going to go right into speech intelligibility. If you're not moving your jaw and you're kind of clenching, that's going to impact your intelligibility as well. And our goal, our overall goal of motor speech intervention is, like I said, that transfer from what happens inside the therapy room to outside the therapy room. So for motor learning, what we're doing, and motor learning is that we want that retention. So in a session, I can prompt a kid, we can get accuracy, or I can give that tactile input, and we can get, let's say, me, and I'm helping them so I can improve their performance right here and now. But it's no good if they only do it with me in the clinic. So we have to set them up for success where they're retaining that. So if I see them on a Monday and we worked on me and I saw them again on Wednesday, did they keep that motor plan? Did it stick? And that's our job as clinicians, to figure out how can we get it to stick. And our ultimate goal is that generalization. If I taught them me, can they now say P or B or money, right? All similar, branch out that movement into other contexts. So when we're using a whole child approach, our session structure looks a little bit different than just articulation goals. So many times I see therapists just focusing on words that start with B and drilling and this, and it's way more than that. We have to set up our structure to facilitate that generalization. Some common behaviors or issues that parents tell me is things like my child breaks down in therapy if they're coming to me from somewhere else and they're saying we haven't had a good experience with speech, or they don't do well, or they shut down. And I always ask, why do you think this is happening? And a lot of times it could be that we want to not focus just on the weaknesses. Kids should come into therapy and feel empowered. It should be something that's happy and empowering. They should feel successful in therapy. We shouldn't just focus on the weaknesses. Also, balancing demands. Speech is hard, so we have to mix it up with things that they're successful with versus things that they're not. So balancing those domains. Sensory overwhelm, like we talked about, and modifying the environment. And a big one is that power struggle. We're not going to withhold things. Say ball, say ball, say ball. But we can have them practice the word ball through maybe using choices or fill in the blanks, or set up where it's not that power struggle. A lot of times for me, what I like to do is I will just give my client the ball, say ball, they do, they don't, they get the ball. And then the demand is, what are we going to do with the ball? It's going to go up or it's going to go down. They get to make a choice with an action, and that creates a better interaction than withholding to say. So always thinking about why the behavior could be happening. And learning is ingrained. A lot of kids will learn a motor pattern and they're using it for years, and it's really hard to break that pattern. So that's what, just thinking about all of that as factors. I just wanted to briefly mention functions of behavior. So behavior is always communication. We always figure out the why. So instead of a client throwing a tantrum, we're not going to say, oh, here's a tantrum. No, we're going to say, what are they trying to communicate to us in that moment? And if we're thinking about like research in this area, a lot of like the behavioral research will mention it could be attention seeking. So giving them words to say like wait or stop. So we're going to get into power words, but teaching your client or your child self-advocacy words like no or stop or hey is a better way to get attention. Or escape. If the demand is too hard or we're just done, instead of throwing ourselves, into that tantrum, we can say done. So thinking of words that are going to help in incidences of a breakdown or behavior. And of course we have sensory, which we talked about, and tangibles, which is like access to things. If I want a lollipop or a pop, I can't say pop. I'm going to try everything to get that pop. So giving these words that are going to empower our clients. And having that AAC device always available, where we talked about. Our focus of the session, so child-centered motor speech intervention, I'm not just like, hey, we're going to do a puzzle. I want to learn more about the child. What do they need? Younger kids, we should be doing play. We should teach them like different ways to play or see how they like to play. For my older kids, self-help is great. Words or activities that are going to make them like more independent or access the community. We have older kids that come in, they are doing pre-vocational, so they're working on job skills. So we have to work on words that are going to help them communicate in the job setting. So one of the big ones is saying their own name. That is super powerful, and it's super, for social, what's your name? So I spend a lot of time on empowering words, not just picking things out of a box. And like I said, the impact is what we're looking for. So in terms of setting goals for sessions, things that I consider is that we're not going to think about developmental norms. Like by the age of 5, they should say these sounds, because every kid is unique. And I know this might be an unpopular like opinion, but I don't use standardized assessments, because what I want to do is I want to measure my client and what they need. So what is the impact? I'm measuring the impact of saying hi on their life. Wow, Johnny said hi to 3 kids this week. Oh my God, that's huge. Versus Johnny said zebra. And I worked, that zebra isn't going to get you as far as hi. So measuring things like impact on their life or criterion reference. Now they said 3 words where you had to open and close your jaw, like pop or mom or on. Wonderful. Or change in support. We don't want kids to be prompt dependent. So if I'm measuring, they needed tactile cue, but then this week I got them to say it with just the visual cue. That is huge. That is measuring progress, not looking at the whole, but very small steps and very small increments so that they're achievable. And what's important to the client. So this is important for that therapist-parent relationship, because we want to know what's important in your child's life. One of my clients, he was working, he was in preschool and they were preparing for a Mother's Day song. So I said, this is wonderful. Give me the lyrics to this Mother's Day song because we're going to practice the word mom so that we can pause the music. He can say mom, whatever line, you know, da da da. I like happy Mother's Day to my mom. And I hammered in mom. That's what we practice on, mom, mom, mom. So that when it was his time to sing the song and we had the music going, he was able to say mom, and mom was so happy. And that was a bigger impact. That's important to my client versus saying something that's not usable or not making an impact. So I love to think about those. These are the zones of proximal development. So in therapy, we're setting goals and we're being aware of like, what can your child do now? What words can they say now? Or what motors are they turning on their voice with no problem? Like, where are they at where they can be completely independent? Then what can we get them to do with a little bit of help, a little bit of support? What can we have them do? And the last layer is that can't do. That's where we want to stay away from. We don't want to present goals or targets that are super hard because then you're going to get that meltdown. So we need to identify as part of our sessions where your child is, where are they living, and where can we get them to go. So I love referencing this because we want to stay in the blue and the teal in therapy, but the blue is great for generalization and practice and feeling successful. I just wanted to dive a little bit into some specifications that we use in motor speech therapy. So in DTTC, it's another approach for apraxia. We're looking at how are we cueing and in what way. So hierarchical cues, we're looking at, are we saying it together? Is your child directly imitating it? Like say hi, they say hi. Is there a delay? Say hi, wait, now you say hi, or spontaneous production. And also identifying which cues work for the client. So some of my kids, I write down, they want to see it orthographically. So I write down the word and then I can use tactile and prompt it in, and we're looking at the word, I'm saying it, they're seeing it. What combination of cueing is going to help your child learn that motor plan? So this is everything that's going through our brains. And identifying where your child is. And a huge part of motor speech intervention is that principles of motor learning. So think about how we're presenting these targets and how we're helping you. So how many times are we having them say it? Are they saying it ball, 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 ball? Or are we able to mix it up? A lot of kids need that repetition of that same consistent motor plan before we introduce something else. So these are all things that are going through my mind as I'm going through the session or setting up a treatment plan. And that was more of the practice side. On the feedback side, how is your clinician shaping it? So I can tell you, that was great job. Or I can say, wow, you put your lips together. Great job putting your lips together. You use these muscles. Giving that specific performance feedback is what kids need early on when they're learning motor plans. So principles of motor learning are super huge in that. And of course, when we make sessions interactive and that turn taking and that choice making, that's really facilitating that motor speech practice. Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we select target, and then I'll get to some questions. So when we're selecting targets and we're using a whole child approach to motor speech intervention, I want to know what movements should the child be working on? What movements do they need to work on? Then is that word that I'm picking meaningful to the client, like we talked about? And are there practice opportunities? Like I said, if it's a low frequency word like zebra, how many times do we say zebra a week? Not many, unless you're going to the zoo or you have a pet zebra. So we're picking words that have a high, powerful repetitive opportunity. So words like no, on, go, right? All these power words are now going to empower your child. So thinking about the why. So these are some really cool power words. We probably say these high frequency words all the time. Or mom could be on here, dad, like whatever the child is using all the time. So we want to have that be a part of it. And for our kids, like I said, if we're beginning to work up that hierarchy, we're just working on voicing to start. But a lot of motor speech intervention is having them feel the movement, talking about the movement. And as clinicians, we need to be flexible. So sometimes I'm just giving that input and I'm feeding that system, and I'm not expecting them to say ball right now, ball. No, let's feel ball. Let's feel how our muscles are moving. Let's talk about that. Let's connect and make those connections. And I like to think about how we're eliciting these targets. So don't ask questions. I tell therapists, don't ask questions that are too complex, like, or to label something like, what color is that? What is that? Versus, where should it go? What should we do? Oh no, what happened? Getting animation and getting motivation. And scripts are always great where we follow a routine. Let's make it go. Where did it go? Up. And then you grab another piece. Where did it go? Let's get it up. And it follows this same routine because it's predictable and you're able to like naturally elicit some of those words. Okay. I'm just trying to to give you guys an overview. I know I have a lot of information. So big takeaway is making it meaningful and connecting movements to the meaning. And so if we're taking a slide, picking activities, like what kid doesn't like a slide, right? I have a lot of clients that want to go down the slide. So I'm going to practice up, maybe then I'm going to do up top, then I'm going to chain it, go up top, then I'm going to say I go up top. So part of our job is to move them through. Okay. I just want to talk about briefly just home programming, and then we're going to answer some questions. Does that sound good?
Yeah, perfect.
Whoops.
I was just going to tell you that it took me 5 years to hear mom for the first time here, because Gabriel had a jaw issue. So for him to say here is mãe, it's similar to the English. And so when he for the first time he said that word, for me it was really meaningful, and also for him. And so it gets them to get other words. When they complete something, they are ready to go to another level, and for me it's fantastic that what you're presenting to us, that we start with what the child can do and
Yes.
not with what he can do. And
Exactly.
this is really, you have to have the feeling, the family, and also the SLP, of course, have to have this feeling to connect with the child and to understand that.
Absolutely. And that's so great. And that's why we're all here, right? So to help kids better communicate and to develop, and to reach their skills. So that's like such a great success story. And that's what I wanted to highlight, is that parents you guys are a big part of the treatment process, and achieving those functional outcomes is, we're the supporters of the treatment plan. So as clinicians, we need to develop and support, but parents are the ones that are super important in this whole process. And I wanted to highlight a study that research shows that for every 1 hour of practice, the likelihood of clinical change increased by 7%. So even just 1 hour a week, and it doesn't have to be a consecutive hour, it could be 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, had clinically significant change on the client's functional outcomes. So even 1 hour is good. And as a parent, I have 4 kids too. Like sometimes it's intimidating to think that we have to sit down every day and have this structured practice. when really practice can be embedded into other activities as long as those core features are there, like we talked about with appropriate motor targets, motivation, cueing, and staying within that zone of proximal development. I'm not going to assign something that the child wasn't successful at in the session. I'm not going to assign that for homework because that's just setting up everybody for failure. We don't want to do that. So I like to adopt the rule that, like, if they can do it consistently in therapy and they don't need so much support, that's something that's ready to be practiced outside. So thank you. I love just like sharing what's in my brain. So a lot of information, but I wanted to make sure we had time for questions.
Yeah, it was awesome. We have some questions at the chat. Can this be offered by an ordinary speech therapist, or do they need to have some special qualifications to work on these techniques?
Absolutely. So just like any doctor, there's an area of specialty. So some doctors are GIs, work on the stomach, some work on ear, nose, and throat. It's the same thing in our field with speech therapy. So although we are, equipped to work generally with different populations, there are areas of specialty. So if someone is working in motor speech disorders, they can take continuing education in different approaches like PROMPT, DTTC, REST, Kaufman, all of those have specialty trainings versus thinking and researching more of principles of motor learning, which are effective. And then there's a level of mentorship. So I've done formal coursework, but then I've also sought mentorship from other clinicians as well as the research piece. So there's different ways of going about it. But having that knowledge base is really what makes motor speech intervention different from articulation or play or just language therapy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Have you worked with any SETP2 kid in specific? It's another question.
Absolutely. I'm trying to look in the chat as well.
The last one.
Yeah. So in our clinic, we currently do not have any with the diagnosis, but with any diagnosis, we always have to look at what are the symptoms that we're seeing and what area of support. So what I like to do as a clinician is not look at labels, but look at what am I seeing? What does my client need? And how can I help them? Because there are crossovers. If we have a child with apraxia or an autistic child with apraxia, there's that crossover of what we know works for apraxia. So sometimes it's difficult to find a practitioner specifically working with a diagnosis, but if you look at more of the characteristics of what the intervention is focusing on, like motor speech, then you would match it to a practitioner who has that as a specialty.
I'm going to ask you another question.
Yes.
And meanwhile, if anyone wants to ask something, please open your camera and feel free to ask. When we read about SETP2 characteristic, one common challenge is the absence of speech.
Mm-hmm.
The path to giving voice to these children can be incredibly difficult. Should we continue to focus on verbal speech?
So each child we're going to view as an individual. So that's what I like to think of. So I never provide a prognosis because, like, who am I to predict the future? And being in the field for 15 years, like, kids are resilient. Kids surprise us all the time. And if we're using a strength-based child-centered approach, we're not putting limitations on kids. But what that goes into is breaking down the therapy so that we're setting them up for success. If you're missing a piece of therapy, a piece of those variables that we know are going to help the child, like we're not addressing sensory or we don't have an AAC in place, those are going to impact their success because they don't have all the pieces to be successful. So what I like to do is think about that bottom-up approach, right? So instead of setting the bar here at words, a lot of times I'm spending a lot of time on posture, airflow, voicing, getting our voice on. So many kids have difficulty just coordinating that piece of speech. So if we aren't living there for a while and building up those skills, it's going to be really hard to say, okay, say go, when we don't have voice and we don't have jaw and we don't have lip movement. So I always want to make sure that the pieces are there and they're synergetically like working together to like, and it's another piece that I want to highlight is those online adjustments, meaning like you try something, it doesn't work. Okay, what else are we doing? So being a clinician, it's our job to be fast thinking and think outside the box. So that's what I really suggest. Therapy be dynamic, always changing, variables always changing, always checking in, always seeing what we can add, what doesn't work. It should look like trial and error.
The speech delay, is it related to poor motor planning or severe learning disability in the SETP2 kids? You can imagine that? Because sometimes we believe that the learning disability could influence also in speech.
Yes, so definitely earlier when I presented the conceptual framework, everything, right? Language and motor, they go together. So our job as clinicians is we have to give them that motor plan so that they can express and say up. If you don't have the motor plan to say saying up is going to be really difficult, and maybe the child's not going to attempt to say it, or it might come out not clear. So it's that whole connection.
When should speech therapy be discontinued? Maybe here for these questions, it's important to say something about communications, because communication is different from speech. They complement.
Absolutely. Communication is that exchange of ideas. So that's where if spoken words are not strong yet, that's why AAC is so important. And AAC should be there as long as the child needs it. And even there is a backup, right? We have so many kids that do develop spoken words and they still use their AAC because maybe they're in a situation where they feel anxiety and their words don't come out. So they need to have a backup. What was the first part? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I answered the second part.
There's a tough one here from Greg. Is prompt effective for children with oral and speech apraxia? Should we focus on oral skills first?
Okay. Okay, so I take the viewpoint that speech is motor. So there's always a motor component. And with prompt therapy, like I talked about, we're looking at the quality of movement, looking at how the jaw moves, looking at how the lips move, how the tongue moves, looking at things like dissociation. So can we move the lips without the jaw? Like we say boo, or do we say boo, where everything moves together? We want to have everything move together instead of T versus T. So looking at the quality of movements. For kids with apraxia, combining prompt with the principles of motor learning or combining prompt with DTTC because of the level of motor planning. So we have motor execution, which is the movement of the muscles to produce the speech, and you have the planning piece. So in terms of which approach, it's better to use more of a eclectic approach where we're combining so that we're addressing all of the different components that children with apraxia need support in. So an eclectic approach is super important.
And there's another one there. How does a cleft palate fit into prompt?
Oh, these are such great questions. So for a cleft palate, there's a lot of variables that we have to look for in terms of location, severity, all that structural piece. For looking at the impact of the cleft palate on speech production or breathing or resonance. What prompt also does is we look at movement patterns, looking at not only just place of articulation, but also the movement into that target sound and the movement out of the target sound. So if I said the word ape, my jaw is high, I was here, ape, versus hop, where they both had a P sound, but the movement into that P sound was completely different. So pop, I had to like bring my jaw back up to say the P, versus when I said ape, my jaw was high. So the way I produced the P was a little bit different because of the movement into it. So we're looking at that. So in terms of a cleft palate, we have to look at, well, what is that impacting? And a lot of times we look for a compensation. So because of the structural difference, what is the client doing instead of what they should be doing? So we always identify the compensation and then go from there to create a better movement pattern, but working through what we call facilitative context, where we're looking at what movements are going to help and ease that low, what is easier for it to come in versus movements that are not facilitative. And that's like a whole dive in there. And I've worked with clients with cleft palate before, and there's all different ways that they're compensating.
Sure. We have 3 minutes. I'd like to ask everyone to open the cameras for us to take a picture of everyone who's here. It was awesome. I really appreciate your time, Dr. Moore.
Yes, this was amazing. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we learned a lot. And I know the SETP2 family that are here with us also like that. It will be in our YouTube channel later. I'm going to wait a few more minutes. Great.
Sorry, I was wondering if I could ask a question.
Sorry.
Okay, who is speaking?
Zahra.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry to disturb. So I'm London based. My daughter's 3.5 years old. I'm really desperate to find a therapist for her. We've gone private before. The only thing that they were doing was just singing songs for her. And I was wondering, so I'm looking in my area. Is there anything, a subspecialty that I'm looking for when I'm searching for a speech therapist? Should I look for motor speech therapists, or is there a specific quality that I'm searching for?
I know it's hard to sometimes search certain terms because of you're going to see variability in people, in therapist training and what they're putting on the website, which is difficult. I know that's a barrier. But Instagram has been great. So if you are an Instagram user, if you put in like a search term in apraxia, there's great accounts out there on apraxia, motor speech. If you put those into keywords, sometimes they're listed better on Instagram than in Google. That's what I find.
Perfect. And with regards to the AEC device, I've tried ordering them from Amazon, but it was quite limited. And I'm not sure whether UK or NHS provides, because you're based in the US. So I think US is far more advanced with regards to research and everything. Where should I get one from?
I'm not familiar with this setup in London, but in the States, the speech therapist can do an evaluation. And then if you have insurance, we work with certain companies like Dynavox or Toby, and they'll coordinate with insurance with the speech therapist evaluation of the ASC to get the device funded. So there's different ways of going about it.
Sure, thank you.
And maybe the family groups in Facebook that we have might help you finding something that might help your family.
All right, thank you.
You're
welcome. Thank you everyone for being here with us. Let's take a picture, everyone.
I just have one question. I don't know if you, I'm sorry, I'm driving and I'm going to try and look into the camera while speaking, but and I will catch up on the recording whenever it's shared. But my question was, my daughter, she is 11.5 years old. She does not have any words, but she uses the AAC device well. And I was trying to talk to a speech therapist to see if we could work on, the oral motor skills and the motor planning of the So the questions I got was, what specific concerns do I have, and what should they be working on? How do I, and I don't know the answer to that, and how do I go about, kind of setting some of those expectations or goals for the therapist? Or should I be even just looking at somebody else who might have dealt with apraxia so that they have a better idea if they can give me suggestions?
As a therapist, it's super helpful when parents come with some goals in mind, like even if it's very like, I want my child to say their name, or I want them to communicate better at school. So like those are helpful. And then also I like to know a baseline. Like sometimes kids are more chattier at home because they're more comfortable. So what are you observing at home versus what are we observing in the clinic, right? So that we can set those expectations. And that's what I find super helpful as well.
Right. But then I think in terms of like, strengthening and, just the oral motor skills, like, is there something that, and I don't know enough to be able to guide her, but is there anything that, we could, kind of start off as basics, right? In order to help basically strengthen that so that she's able to, let's say, blow bubbles or, close her mouth so that she can make some sounds hopefully in the future.
Absolutely. And there's layers to that. So we have, speech, and then we have oral movements. And then also myofunctional therapy looks at the movement of the tongue and how that impacts airway and facial growth. And that's a whole other area. So we always go in layers, like how are the muscles moving for speech? How are they moving for non-speech movements? Like you said, blowing, and how are they moving for when we're eating? So peeling back those layers.
Okay. And is that something that they would be able to observe and make an assessment, like as a teamwork, or because I'm kind of lost in trying to tell, so I was just trying to see if how do I even go about just setting
Maybe
some of those
it would be
expectations.
important, Dr. Moore, for you to share your Instagram with us, so
Yes.
we can ask you questions later, because we are
Absolutely.
running out of time here.
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
that would be awesome. We can do
That's
that.
okay. I wish I can stay all night, but
Yeah.
you guys are wonderful. You can feel free to DM me on Instagram. It's at drmoorespeech.com. DRMOORE speech.com. Oh, sorry, not .com. I'm thinking website. I also have a website, drmoorespeech.com, but on Instagram it's just at drmoorespeech.
Okay.
Perfect.
Everyone smile now, please. Gina, you're okay. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We had 25 attendees. It was awesome. I loved hearing you, Dr. Moore. I hope we can hear you again.
Thank you so much for having me. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.